Joe, I'm not sure if that's supposed to have audio, but we can't hear it on our end.
Oh, let me see what's going on. It always seems to give issues here. Well, one moment. Well, we'll skip that tonight because we're having a little technical issues, but I'll make sure I put the link to this video in the chat for everyone to take a look at later. It kind of just introduced the Beginning with Habitat program. So Beginning with Habitat program is a program that works statewide to work with conservation partners to help collate all of our important mapping habitat features in the state of Maine. And it has an outreach program, which I work in, to help private landowners as they begin to work on conservation issues on their property. So as I've said a few times, I'm the private lands biologist. I started this position late in November 30th of 2020. So I've just been here just a little bit over a year. And over the last year, I've worked with directly 63 landowners representing about 35,000 acres in the state. Landowners with parcels from 5 to 16,000 acres. And, most of those landowners were what we would call family landowners, so 500 acres or less. I've also worked 14 different events connecting with over 500 landowners, events like this right here. And we've also expanded our website to collect a lot of different resources for landowners and land managers to use as they begin their conservation practices on their property. So what is wildlife? Well, wildlife is the non-domesticated animal species that occur on the landscape. So when we say wildlife, we're referring not only to just things you might think of like moose and bear and deer, but we're referring to all mammals, all reptiles and amphibians, all birds, and all insects. So that being said, in Maine, we have well over 15,000 species of wildlife, with the vast majority of those being invertebrates. And then we have 423 bird species, 61 mammal, 39 fish, 18 amphibians, and 17 reptiles. And of the over 15,000 species we have, less than 100 of those are species that are hunted or fished. And these are some of the species that in the Beginning with Habitat program, we really focus on. And who does wildlife belong to? Well, wildlife is held in what we call the public trust, meaning that wildlife in the United States belongs to all of the people who live in the United States. That being said, here in Maine, in a state that's 94% privately owned, while wildlife might belong to the public, its habitat and the animals themselves are occurring mostly on private land, which makes it important for us as conservation-minded individuals to become land stewards of our own land to help manage for wildlife habitat, because state and federal agencies just can't provide all of the conservation needs on the 6% of land that they own here in the state of Maine. So what's habitat? Well, habitat's an area that provides an organism with all the necessary requirements to survive. So for us, that might be our home, our grocery store or our garden, our farm, the farm we get our food from, our well or our town water or the rivers that feed that, the groundwater. Pretty much everything that you use to get to where you got to go and what's around you is your habitat. So when we're talking about wildlife, we really have 4 principles of habitat. We have space, food, cover or shelter, depending on which term you prefer, and water. So I want to go through each component of the habitat, each principle, and just kind of talk about it as a landowner, how you might be able to think about it. So your space is something that you can pretty easily attach your mind to what it is. It's the acreage that you own, the space around you. But when you're thinking about wildlife habitat management on your property, it's really good to understand your space, understand the space around you, understand how much land you have, how much land around you is undeveloped, or what sort of development is around you. And that really helps you figure out what sort of species that you can manage for on your property. Some species have home ranges of 4,000 acres. Other species live their entire life within a few acres. So space is kind of one of the first places we think about. What can you do when you're talking about managing space? Well, like we said, determine the amount of space you have. Consider what your neighbors are doing. If you're looking to manage for certain species that you know occur on your property and your neighbor's property, maybe see if your neighbors are interested in partnering in activities. Determine the special needs of the species you desire. If you own 4,000 acres, if you're fortunate, you know that you could potentially manage for the entire home range of a moose. If you only own 10 acres, well, you know that you could still have several pairs of tufted titmice that live on your property. So like I said, you're kind of just trying to determine what sort of species fit within the manageable space that you have. And then I'd recommend that you utilize beginning with habitat tools to look at maps. These are tools that we have on our website that really help people visualize what's going on around them. So this map here is what we would call our Undeveloped Habitat block map. And this shows you in the light shaded parts, all the developed area, but the green shaded parts is all the undeveloped habitat. So you can look where your property is on this map. We have it online, and you can determine how many acres you are part of that's undeveloped. You might be surprised. There are many landowners I've worked with who own 20 acres, but they're in a 20,000 acre undeveloped habitat block. So you can find the undeveloped habitat block on our website. I'll also have a link to that in the chat for later in today. Let's talk about what sort of species need very large home ranges. Well, here we are, we have what we're going to call a large undeveloped area. Let's call this 500 acres or more. These are all of the species that you can manage for. And, most everyone recognizes the species up here. Some of them they might not think of off the top of their head when they're thinking of management. But if you have 500 or more acres, this is the full suite of species that you can really cover. And as we go down in scale, certain species kind of start popping off the list. Now, this doesn't mean you can't manage for those species on your property. It just means that you don't capture their entire home range. And then as we get even smaller in acreage, we look at things that exist on 1 to 19 acres. So you still have many small rodents, you have small mammals, most reptiles, most amphibians, many songbirds. So it goes to show you that no matter how much land you have to manage, you can still manage for something. And then when we're trying to look at our space, we can also kind of look at what is known to occur there. So also one of the maps we have on our website is called the Plant Animal Habitat Map. This map really is kept up to date with all of the resources we have at the state as to what is occurring or known to occur on different parcels throughout the state. So for example, you might find that there's a mapped vernal pool near you, or you're in an inland wading bird and waterfowl habitat, or you have wetlands that are known to be good for wildlife. So you can really use this tool to also help you understand your space. So we've talked about how you can understand how much space you have, how much undeveloped space you're part of, and now you can kind of understand what might be on your property. Now, these maps don't capture everything. If there's no inland wading bird or waterfowl habitat mapped on this map over your parcel, it doesn't necessarily mean it's not there. If there's something mapped, it doesn't necessarily mean it's exactly that size. Things might change over time, but this just gives you a really good idea to start planning. So we'll recap space here. What can you do? Understand the size of your parcel. Work to keep your parcel intact to provide larger areas of habitat, and work with your neighbors to determine if there's shared conservation values, and you can work on them together across property lines. Now, the next component of wildlife habitat is food. So food is obviously a key component for providing wildlife habitat. If you're encouraging the production of diverse food options on your property, you're really doing a lot to help better the wildlife habitat by encouraging growth of native and varied food sources. You can also help meet the nutrient needs of wildlife throughout the entire season. So unlike us humans who have the ability to get most of the produce we're interested in all year long, wildlife has a varied diet seasonally. So as certain things come into bloom or certain nuts and berries fall or ripen, they're consumed, but they're not available all year round. And many species even have gut biomes that change throughout the season to adapt to different types of food sources. So you think deer go from eating herbaceous browse and grasses during the summertime to eating woody twigs and stems in the wintertime. So a couple of type of foods that I really want to talk about are what we would call mast, M-A-S-T. We have what we would classify as two types of mast, hard mast and soft mast. So hard mast are your acorns, your beech nuts, your beaked hazelnuts, and your seeds, whereas soft masts are your berries and fruits, your apples, your raspberries, blueberries, strawberries, winter berries, viburnum berries that we have here in the state of Maine. So as a manager of your own property, there's tons of stuff you can do to help these food sources persist. You can encourage the production of hard mast species by promoting them by selectively harvesting trees around your hard mass producers and allowing your hard mass producing trees to get more sunlight and become more prolific. We call that a crop tree release. You know, if you have a beautiful oak, but it's kind of starting to get shaded out by some tall pines around it, you can consider harvesting the few of the pines around there and allowing that oak to get a little bit more sun. The other thing we can talk about is increasing the amount of variety we have in the terms of soft mass. You know, many people plant apples and berries on their property. You can plant them not only for your own consumption, but for wildlife as well. What are some other types of food that we might not necessarily think of? Well, herbaceous browse, grasses, sedges, rushes, and agricultural crops. You know, I think everyone's probably seen a deer in a cornfield after the harvest, or seen turkeys in a field in the fall, in the spring. Promoting different types of herbaceous plant growth on your property can also provide a lot of added value for wildlife food. So one thing we can talk about is encourage the growth of these herbaceous plants, have a diverse array of native plant species. If you're not using a field for agricultural production, or you're not using that back 40 for hay, consider delaying mowing to allow your herbaceous plants grow for longer and go to seed. Maybe only mow it every 3 years, maybe only mow a third of it every year. And this is going to provide a good diverse array of food resources. Also, you don't really think of herbaceous growth in the woods, but there's a lot of herbaceous plants that grow in the woods that provide a lot of high valuable food resources for wildlife. So if you're out cutting firewood in your property, maybe consider taking a small patch of trees all from one area, removing the full canopy in, let's say, a 10th acre plot, and taking all your firewood out and then reseeding that area with some herbaceous seed mixes that can help provide herbaceous growth, or just let it grow back normally. You know, it provides a lot of different food opportunities. And the other things we got to think about too for food are sources of pollen. You know, we talked about all the critters we have here in the state of Maine and how 15,000 of them are insects. Well, you don't really think about insect food all the time. So providing a good diverse source of annuals and perennials and wildflowers can be really beneficial to your property. Not only are you providing food for insects, you're then providing food for your songbirds and food for other critters on your property that eat insects. And there's always the aesthetic value too. Creating a pollinator garden is really rewarding. It's fun to see things come into season. You know, especially when you're thinking of goldenrods and asters, we see them a lot of times growing on the side of the road. Those plants bloom in late August, even into September, and they retain their flowers very late into the beginning of the fall, and provide some of the last resources for things like our pollinating insects to utilize before the wintertime comes around. And we've kind of touched on this a little bit, but what are some other types of food? Well, wildlife is food. Insects are food. Small mammals can be food. And then we have aquatic food. You have amphibian eggs, tadpoles, fish, mussels, clams, wetland plants. So providing the ability for these resources to exist on your property is also extremely beneficial for providing for a variety of wildlife habitat. These herbaceous openings we talked about earlier provide a great place for insects to begin to propagate, and they provide really great opportunities for fly-catching songbirds to perch in trees and fly over these openings. Also leaving behind down woody debris, brush piles, leaving your leaf litter, delaying your mowing, that all provides habitat to increase a lot of opportunity for different insects. For example, I always leave my leaf litter on my lawns through the end of the fall. I don't take care of it until really mid-spring. And by doing that, I provide a lot of opportunity for small mammals to now kind of feel a little bit safer moving around on my lawn underneath my leaves. And that provides more opportunity for certain birds of prey to hunt for small mammals on my property. Leaving all that leaf litter, I always have migrating songbirds flying through and stopping and kicking around the leaves and collecting insects. And many times I come home from work and I pull in the driveway and a flock of 25 birds takes off from my lawn. And it's just a really easy way to provide more food on your property. And then always bird feeders. We have guidance on our website on how to follow proper management practices with bird feeders to avoid human and animal conflict. Many people have had issues with bears or other critters getting into their bird feeders, and they kind of feel like they turn into squirrel feeders sometimes. But bird feeders are a great way to provide some seed resources and throughout the whole year. And as a birder, I like having the bird feeders out so I get the chance to see kind of what's still hanging around the neighborhood. But when it comes to wildlife food, what can we do? Well, maintain the current food sources you have on your property and try to promote those food sources. If you have a bunch of winterberry that's growing in the ditch next to your road, but you have some invasive honeysuckles, go out there and try to clip those honeysuckles and give those winterberry a little bit more space. If you're interested, reach out to your local soil and water conservation district about plant sales. They almost all of them have them in the spring, and you can buy some of these great plants I've mentioned, your berries and your viburnums and things like that can really provide a good soft mass resource. Consider doing what you can to increase the production of your hard mass. If you've got oak trees that are getting, overcompeted, maybe thin out your oak stand a little bit, maybe contact an arborist or a forester, or get a forest management plan to help promote a better oak stand or help to get more beech on your property. And then planting natural food sources and promoting wildflowers and pollinator gardens is just another great way to provide a variety of food on your property. So another component is cover or shelter. So cover, shelter is pretty self-explanatory. It is the areas that animals need to live for nesting or for escape from predators. It's really beneficial to maintain a forest in your backyard that has a really diverse age structure. So wildlife will often use different parts of a forest throughout their life cycle. For example, wood frogs. Wood frogs need vernal pools for breeding and egg laying, but actually spend like 98% of their life surrounded in the surrounding forested wetlands and upland forests. So if you can work to provide a diverse age structure and a diverse type of cover around you, you can provide habitat for a number of species. I've worked out in the field with landowners who have vernal pools right in the middle of a big upland forest near a wetland complex. So by working to maintain an intact, diverse array of cover types there, they can provide the habitat needs for that species for its entire life. And this is where you really don't need a ton of land to provide that whole cover regime that the animals need. So when we talk about cover, we have a few different things we talk about. We have the overstory, the midstory, and the understory. So the overstory is what you think of when you think of forest canopy, usually 30 plus feet tall. The overstory provides perching opportunities for songbirds. It provides nesting opportunities for songbirds, for small mammals. And this is where your hard mass comes from, your acorns and your beech. A lot of it's produced in the overstory. So maintaining an overstory is really important for wildlife and for providing, your seed trees for the future. And another thing that we really want to encourage people to maintain in their forest overstory is standing dead trees. So standing dead trees provide great sources of nesting habitat. As a tree begins to die, it also provides food. It starts being decomposed by insects, and you'll have something like a pileated woodpecker come in and start excavating the tree. I think we've all heard this or seen this ourselves, and create a big cavity as they're looking to find some insects, and then they'll move along, but something like a tufted titmouse might come in behind that and nest in that cavity, or a yellow-bellied sapsucker might come in and nest in that cavity. So it really provides a great opportunity to increase the structural diversity, increase the cover, and increase even food by maintaining some of these standing dead in your overstory. And it's really easy to do. I think a lot of us look out, if we see a standing dead tree in our backyard, it's like, well, I gotta get rid of that. That's an eyesore. That's in the way. Well, if it's not in the way of falling on somebody, if it's not in the way of falling on, if there's not a chance that it's going to fall on a building, or it's not like your tree stand's not in it, you should be considering maintaining that tree for the great resource that it provides. Then next we have our midstory. Our midstory is 6 to 30 feet tall. And like the overstory provides nesting opportunity, the midstory provides nesting opportunity for a different array of species. So things like your hermit thrushes want to nest closer to the midstory, somewhere in that 6 foot range. So if you think of a forest, sometimes you think of these forests where all you have is an overstory, and you could ride a horse underneath the canopy with no issue. Well, if you're looking to provide a diverse array of habitats, by increasing the midstory component of your forest, you're increasing what we call vertical diversity. So you add in a different age class of forest there. So that's going to be your future canopy trees. But they're also just going to provide cover in that midstory that you're not normally going to get if you manage your forest differently. And then we have the understory. So the understory is 0 to 6 feet tall, and it consists of shrubs and small trees and saplings. Again, this provides nesting opportunities for a variety of different species. Some species really like to nest closer to the ground, just a couple feet off the ground. So by allowing yourself to manage for a strong midstory, a strong understory, a strong overstory, there's really a great way for you to increase the biodiversity capacity of your forest, meaning the number of different species you have, and the biomass, so the number of individuals you have. So I think of your understory, your midstory, and your overstory as a hotel. So if you don't have an understory or a midstory, you don't have the opportunity for anything to be there. So that'd be like having a hotel with the first 2 floors closed and only the 3rd floor accessible. So by working with a wildlife biologist or a forester or a conservation specialist, you can figure out ways to increase that structure in the 3 different strata that we've been talking about today. Another great thing to do in the understory, like we talk about the need for standing dead trees, there's a really great value in dead woody material on the ground. So brush piles, natural and artificial, provide cover for insects, for cover for different animals. They do a really good job of providing cover for snowshoe hare. Depending on what part of the state you're in, they could be utilized by New England cottontail. And, you know, they really do a good job of providing a safe place for things that get eaten by a lot of stuff to escape to. A perfect example of the benefit that can come from a brush pile is a few years ago, I was deer hunting and I had a brush pile in front of me that I was looking at pretty much all day. And the brush pile had a squeaking noise coming from it. So there was a bunch of rodent activity going nuts in there. And I looked to my left, like you do when you're deer hunting, and I looked to my right, and next thing I know, I have an owl flying at almost head level, and it lands right on that brush pile. And the squeakiness of the mouse immediately went away. It's because these animals know that that's where their prey likes to hang out, and that they know that that's a good place to find a food resource. So brush piles are easy to make. You know, as you're limbing trees or cleaning a trail, instead of just throwing things off to the side, maybe consider just piling them up. I've talked a lot already about the standing dead trees. A really great thing to do is to try to maintain a variety of different diameters of standing dead trees. So things from very large trees, 24 inches in diameter or greater, down to very small trees, 6, 8 inches in diameter. They provide a different array of habitats. So pileated woodpeckers like using larger trees than hairy and downy woodpeckers. And porcupines and raccoons will use a large diameter tree with a rotting core to kind of hang out in there. Bigger trees that have shaggy bark that's starting to fall out provides opportunities for our bat species to crawl under the bark and use them as a little hibernaculum. So providing a bunch of different diameters is really beneficial. So what can we do as wildlife-minded individuals with a backyard that's ready for management? Well, maintain a diverse age structure. This is a little tricky to do by yourself. We have a lot of great resources on our website, but if you're looking to maintain a diverse age structure, I really recommend finding a forester to help you come up with a forest management plan to assist with this. Retaining standing dead trees. Well, this is what I call low-hanging fruit. If you have standing dead, don't knock them over. Creating standing dead trees. We can do that through girdling of trees with a chainsaw. Cut a couple strips around the tree going in through the bark, and you kind of cut off the supply of nutrients through what's called the xylem and the phloem on the outside of the tree. And it allows the tree to stand and begin to decompose and die over several years, sometimes a decade before it falls over. Retain your forest debris like your twigs, your sticks, your leaf litter, the kind of things that mentally we think we need to pick up to make it look clean, but a messy wood is a healthy wood. So the messier, the better. Create brush piles. Like we talked about all the benefits of that earlier today. And delay mowing. So in your fields that you might not be using, consider delaying mowing. I have a 1 acre field next to my house that I don't use for any sort of farm product. And I delay mowing. I mow it every 3 years. So I get a really great, beautiful wildflower garden in there. And I really get to see a lot of great pollinators and songbirds hanging out in there every year. And then on our website, we have a lot of guidance for bird and bat houses and pollinator boxes. And these are fun projects, especially if you have children or grandchildren to work on and build and maintain and put out on your property. So water, that's kind of an obvious one for wildlife habitat. Everything needs water. Everything needs water. We know that. As humans, we can only go a few days without it. So water is essential for all wildlife. Wildlife rely on water for hydration, thermoregulation, hygiene, to find food sources. For fish, it's habitat, and to travel. So water, occurs on the landscape in a variety of forms, and a lot of them things that we think about are lakes and ponds and rivers and streams. But water also occurs in vernal pools and in our wetlands. So protecting your water resources and using best management practices around them is really an essential component for management of your property. So like we said, we have a lot of different water sources here in the state of Maine. We have lakes and ponds, rivers and streams, bays and oceans, coastal wetlands and salt marshes, freshwater wetlands and vernal pools. So along the edges of water is what we call riparian habitat. These are some of the highest value places in the woods for wildlife. Something like 80% of animals in the state of Maine utilize riparian habitat at some point in their life cycle, whether that's for finding food resources. I think of things like mink, which are always along the stream banks. Obviously your otters and things like that are going to be using those riparian habitats. But also, as the world develops around us, these streams and rivers are often some of the last places to get developed. So they create these travel corridors for wildlife to congregate in. So if you're a private landowner and you have a stream, some of the things you can really make sure that you're doing is preventing erosion and sediment from getting into your stream. Working with some of the local organizations like your soil and water conservation districts, like your local land trusts, to help develop an education based on how to prevent sediment from getting into those water resources. Limiting the activities you take place in around your stream. So, at the Inland Fisheries and Wildlife, our recommendation is to have 100-foot setback off of your stream where you really limit your activities. If you're going to have some commercial forestry done or building, look to local permitting agencies like your town, and then to the state, and talk with your forester, because there are legal setbacks that come with streams. So it's really important to just try to maintain a really good intact habitat around the stream. Our forest canopy overhanging the stream helps regulate the temperature of our water bodies. So by maintaining a robust forest around our streams and rivers, you can literally decrease the temperature of the stream, which increases its capability of carrying dissolved oxygen, which makes the stream healthier. Also, a lot of our fish rely on terrestrial invertebrates, so insects that fall from trees into the water to provide them as a food resource. So if you are impacting that buffer around the stream, you're not providing the animals that live in the water the opportunity to forage like normal. Another thing we talked about briefly is vernal pools. Vernal pools are temporary pools. They're small, they're forested, and they're fishless, and they provide breeding habitat. So this is where we get our spotted salamanders. This is where we get our wood frogs, So perfect example when I say temporaries, this is a vernal pool. This is in May, and this is in August. So one thing that's really important for us to do when we're managing our property is, if we find these vernal pools, make sure that we're not impacting them. Make sure that we're not working with inside of the vernal pool or affecting the hydrological regime. Make sure that we're keeping a buffer around those vernal pools. We're not putting permanent roads near them, and we're kind of limiting our movements and our impact. So what can we do with invasive species? What can we do with our water resources? Well, use the beginning with habitat maps to determine what water resources you have. Make sure that there's nothing that's human-made blocking your water resources. So if you have an undersized culvert, if you have a clogged culvert, if you have garbage and debris, work to clean that stuff up and really reopen the free movement of the water. And Reach out to me if you have questions about your water resources. Reach out to your district forester, your soil and water conservation district, your local land trust. All these people have great resources that they can help provide you with some information on how to really maintain well-connected water and maintain a healthy and vegetated buffer around your water resource. If you have a field coming down to a stream, consider allowing that space along the edge of your stream to just grow wild. If you're not using, if there's, it's not agriculture and you're not having animals that are moving in and out of it, consider just letting that get really brushy and shrubby and really provide a good vegetated buffer. That provides really great wildlife habitat. It helps slow surface water from coming into the stream to prevent erosion. And it just really stabilizes the banks of those streams to help prevent the banks from eroding as well. All right. We've covered the 4 basic principles of wildlife habitat. So I'm on my last topic, and I don't even like talking about it, but we have to. Invasive species. So while it's not a principle of wildlife habitat, it is something that invades our wildlife habitat. So an invasive species is a non-native species, including seeds, eggs, spores, and other parts that whose introduction causes or is likely to cause economic harm, environmental harm, or harm to human health. So the term invasive is used for the most aggressive non-native species. So these are species that grow and reproduce rapidly, and they can spread without human help and cause major disturbances to the area where they're present. And invasive species often outcompete or kill many of the native species that are far more valuable to wildlife. So when we think about things like winterberry, which we see the bright red berries right now along the side of the road and in the wet areas and on our power lines, an invasive species that presents itself similarly is honeysuckle. They have red berries as well. But honeysuckles take root much faster. They're some of the first thing that become green in the early spring. So they begin growing much quicker, and they outcompete all these other species and take up the space that they could actually be in. So as a wildlife manager on private lands, as a property owner, what can we do about invasive species? Well, we can learn about the different types of invasive species. So on our website, we have links to these invasive species guidebooks where you can figure out whether what you have is an invasive species or not. You can survey your property for invasive species. So the Maine Forest Service provides some funding opportunities for many people to have their property surveyed for invasive species and come up with an invasive species management plan. If you have a bad invasive species management plan, invasive species content, consider creating an invasive species management plan and removing the invasive species. And we have a ton of guidance online. You can remove them by hand, you can dig them up, you can get an herbicide application done. Take care of invasive species on your property is really some of the best places to spend your conservation dollars. Conservation dollars are always limited. You never have enough money to cover all the conservation and all the wildlife habitat improvements that you want. So when you start thinking about where's the best place to use some of your conservation dollars, it really is with this invasive species management. So if you have invasive species, it prevents the species that you really need from growing. And that prevents them from providing the food and the cover that your native wildlife species are really going to need. So after you've started to address your habitat concerns and your invasive species and all that, another thing to do is think about making it sustainable. So you can learn about the different current use tax programs we have here in the state of Maine. This is where you can take your property and put it into a tax category that allows you to pay a lower rate if you're doing certain things like managing for open space for wildlife or managing for forests and forestry. So I encourage everyone to reach out if you have questions about that to your district forester or myself, your private lands wildlife biologist, and talk about options. And then you can also look into things like conservation easements, working with local land trusts to find people who might be interested in your land, generations down the road. So I know I'm a little long-winded. My friends describe me as verbose, but I'm at the end of my presentation here. So I'd like to open up to any questions.
Feel free to just unmute yourself if you have a question, or type it in the chat and I can share it.
I saw that someone asked about retaining leaf litter on lawns could also encourage tick population. So yeah, with any sort of activity that's going to encourage insects, you get what is kind of the bad insect in here now, and that's our ticks. So there is that trade-off as well. We always encourage people to be really vigilant with their checking of themselves or their pets for ticks, for obvious tick-borne illnesses and stuff. Animals still eat those ticks. Possums will eat up to 5,000 ticks a year. So it is a food resource, but that's where, as a wildlife manager and as a private landowner, you do have to balance your personal health choices and your wildlife choices. So if there's an area where you're going to be playing with your grandkids or your kids, or you have a soccer ball you kick around, maybe keep that area clear then, and allow kind of the everything to be elsewhere. Any other questions? Right now, while people are thinking, I'm dropping a couple of resources in the chat. Oh, let me put it to the whole group. So this is the Landowner Toolbox that I like to call, or at least what I like to call it. This has a lot of really great resources for landowners. This will help you get connected with folks like myself, help you figure out who is your district forester. If you're looking to find a forester to hire, we have this information on here as well. We have guidance on our current use tax programs, and then we have a ton of guidance on wildlife habitat management. So I have a guide that I wrote earlier this year called Wildlife Habitat Management, a landowner, kind of an introduction to principles of habitat management for Maine landowners. And that really goes into detail a lot of the presentation I just gave. So if I were a professor giving a lecture, that's what I would hand out today to go along with it as required reading, is my introduction to principles of habitat management for Maine landowners. And if you click on that, there's a lot of great resources that are hyperlinked that can help direct you to where you might want to go as you're trying to address those habitat concerns. I saw someone ask if there's a strategy to attract possums. Well, we talked about things like brush piles. We talked about things like snag trees, cavity trees. Those are all great things to have on your property to provide that habitat that they're looking for. Leaving that leaf littered behind, leaving that coarse woody debris behind, that's providing the opportunity for their food sources to exist. Having some of that soft mast on the landscape can really help provide for that as well. Strategies for helping bat populations. Well, I sound like a broken record, but standing dead trees. So the trees that are standing and dead with shaggy bark on the side, that provides those areas for the bats to hang out with. Everyone thinks of bats and we think of caves and we think of hanging upside down, Dracula and all that stuff. A lot of our bats are tucking in behind the bark in our trees. So maintaining those shaggy bark trees that are standing dead is really great for bat habitat. A lot of our bats are insect eaters, so having a ton of opportunity for insects to persist on the landscape is really helpful as well. Think about, I often see bats flying around the back field of my house. I have a stream that goes through there. I keep a nice vegetated buffer. It's killer for insects. So I try to stay away from it for, a fair portion of the year. And then it's surrounded by some opening that I don't mow, that I let grow. And the insects are just crazy back there. So the bats are swooping all around, and that's kind of where they're hunting for food. Okay. Any other questions? Well, I'm going to, in the chat also, and you can find this on our website, put my contact info. And I would encourage anyone who has questions to give me an email, give me a phone call. If you're interested in having me come take a look at your property, there's some names I recognize on the call today. I've been out to these landowners' property to talk with them. Feel free to reach out, and we can schedule something that works for all of us.
I have a question, if you don't mind me yelling it out. Another
Yeah.
one. I guess I should probably put my video on. There we go. So I've got a little brook that goes through the property, and there is a lot of woody material that goes down, falls in, or trees that fall over, and I've mostly left them alone. You did mention making sure there wasn't blockages and things, but I always think of those as being a natural form, and knowing how streams kind of, that helps retain some of the water and keeping stuff in terms of storm, managing storm flow. In terms of the wildlife, assuming there's some benefit to that. I don't think there's any fish in our brook, but I don't know.
Absolutely. So like if there were fish, there's a practice we call chop and drop, where you deliberately put woody material into a stream to provide for fish habitat, but it also provides for microinvertebrate habitat. Small streams like that, it's probably likely that you have a mink or a weasel moving around there. So if you're a tiny mink in a big world and everything's scary, having some woody debris to snake around and move up and down and over is really great. And the other thing is, this is just my personal observation, anecdotal, but every time I see a mink or a weasel or anything like that in the woods, it's standing on a piece of woody debris. And the only thing I can think is, when you're this tall, standing on something twice your height gives you a better vantage point. And when you're a prey species or you're a predator looking for something, that's really great. So leaving that material in your stream, assuming that it's not preventing the flow from moving through, is really great. Where you get into trouble is if you have clogged up culverts, or you have essentially these like dams that are created. It can slow the water down. It can cause it to heat up. It can reduce the amount of dissolved oxygen that can be held in there. So finding that happy balance of just where the water can still flow, but the material's still in there. Also, if you have a log that's going across the whole stream, and you have a trail camera, that's a great place to put them, because animals love to use those bridges. And it's funny, I was with a landowner in Strong earlier this year. They built a bridge and put a small footbridge, very smartly designed. They put it across their little stream there, and they put a camera up, and nothing crossed, not a thing. Well, a tree fell down right next to the bridge. They moved the camera over to the tree, and they get all of their photos right there. So they ignore the human-made one, and they use that log that's natural. So
Interesting. Thank you.
Someone asked if ice fishing is ever a problem for small ponds that host a breeding loon pair. Are you referring to lead issues? Well, just so lead is small acreage for, Alana, thanks for sharing the log. I was just thinking that's a really fun photo log that I was thinking about when I made that recommendation. So loons are highly mobile. I mean, they come back to their pond. They have what we call it high site fecundity, so they return to their natal land, and that's where they want to try to start a life cycle. If there's not enough food resources, they'll move. And the other thing too is our regulations for fishing and what you can take and keep are highly regulated. They're studied very well, and they're designed so that the take that human beings participate in is designed to not have impact to limit the natural food sources, in those ponds. So that is accounted for when fisheries biologists and wildlife biologists are making their legal requirements. Any other questions? I don't see any more in the chat. If anyone wanted to yell a question out, that's fine too. Okay, I'm not seeing any more.
Just a quick question about planting trees in the face of climate change. Any special recommendation regarding that?
I can't think of the ones off the top of my head, because when I usually walk with landowners, I bring my district forester with me, and they're more up to date on that stuff. But there are several trees here in the state of Maine that we believe are going to fare better in a changing climate and are going to handle a warming climate better than others. I can't remember which ones they are off the top of my head, and I don't want to quote the wrong ones. But I believe the Maine Forest Service has some information about that on their website. And if you shoot me an email, which I put in the chat here, I'll find the answer and get back to you. Hope like early next week. So.
Okay, thank you.
No problem.
Another quick question. We have a wildlife opening on our woodlot.
Yep.
About 4 acres. We're trying to grow something there. Nothing but brambles grow. We've been trying to put tons of calcium on it to align to neutralize it, but nothing's happening long term. So, any suggestions?
Yeah. Have you had the soil tested?
Yes, we did. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, it's a challenge because here in Maine we have very acidic soils, so it's you're fighting a battle with trying to get the soil to a certain condition. There is a wildlife seed mix that was developed by a retired state biologist. It is sold, I believe, by the Sportsman Alliance of Maine, and it is a seed mix that is designed to have some clovers and some non-invasive food sources. So it's not like a great mix if someone's trying to plant a deer food plot, but it has a wild mix. And there's also a seed mix. And again, shoot me an email about this and I can follow up with you. There's also a seed mix that was developed by an organization called the Xerxes Society that is designed to be made up of seeds that are known to grow well in this region. And that can be a good option as well.
Great. Thanks a lot.
And Alana's all on top of putting everything I'm saying in the chat for us at live, so I appreciate that.
Okay, thank you so much.
So attracting bullfrogs. So unlike our frogs like wood frogs or our spotted salamanders, who will lay their eggs, have their eggs hatch, and have the tadpoles become adults in one growing season and crawl out of the pools before they dry up. Bullfrogs, their tadpoles are tadpoles for a full year and then become bullfrogs the second year. So you need a permanent or semi-permanent, what we would call semi-permanent water source. So you would need a pond or something like that for to have them around. And then something with something stagnant, water, stuff that you would normally associate with cattails and mucky and green and the kind of thing that you probably don't want to go swimming in. That's kind of what you're looking for with your bullfrogs. So those stagnant pools that have water all year round, or at least a couple of years in a row, only drying out in bad drought years.
Joe, we had a question from Chris that says, how are beavers or snapping turtles faring in balance with the loon populations?
I'm not sure what sort of impact the two of them would have together. So to my knowledge, there isn't a major sort of concern between those three species in their interactions. I've captured many loons while hearing beaver tails hitting at night. So they seem to be living in harmony. Okay, getting some questions rolling here. I got plenty of time, so I can answer questions all night. And if you can't think of anything, or you don't want to type anything up, or don't want to turn your camera on, feeling shy, like I said, please do not hesitate to email me. It is literally my job to answer private landowners' questions and visit with private landowners and work with private landowners. So it is what I do every day, all day.
And you'll come do a site visit too, if it.
Yes. So I generally try to limit my site visits to people with 10 acres or more, because that is where certain forest management cost share kicks in, financial assistance. But I don't necessarily say no if someone has less than 10 acres. It might just be one of those things where, well, if you can wait until I'm down there for another visit, I'll go over to your place at the same time. So I cover the entire state. So Kittery, Caribou, Lubec, Allagash, all the way up to the Cobra and Gore, everywhere, so it's a big state. So for some of the smaller sites, it kind of it's hard to get to them. Because, I've driven 4 hours one way to get to sites, and then hopped on a snowmobile, and then snowmobiled into the woods, and then pulled out my snowshoes, and then snowshoed to the site before. So it can be a project. But I usually try to get to everybody, and if not, at least at minimum can set up a time to have a good long conversation on the phone, or a Teams or Zoom call to really discuss your goals. Chris, I am based out of the Augusta office, but I also work out of my home office in Durham, Maine, near Freeport and Auburn. But I'm highly mobile. So, later this year, I'll be in Holton giving a talk. I've been on islands off the coast of Blue Hill, meeting with private landowners out there. I've been up to pretty much every place. Yeah, I agree. I think I give a lot of discussions about landowners and their interactions that they have, and we have a lot of interactions between landowners and the animals that they have, or the kind of animals that might interact with each other better or for worse. And I give more talks all over the state. So tonight's talk was kind of just about the basics of wildlife habitat management, but I definitely go into more in depth into how other practices and wildlife can coexist together as well. So
I think that will continue to grow, that sort of intersection between wildlife and human populations, as the habitat becomes more fragmented as well.
Yeah, and that's a big thing we talk about in the beginning with habitat program, is just the importance of maintaining as much habitat connected as we can. As I showed you with all those charts, at a certain point you lose the ability to manage for certain habitat, for certain wildlife, if you don't have enough space. So you figure if you have a housing development here and a shopping mall here and a parking lot here, now instead of 1,000 acres together, you kind of have patchy couple hundred acres. So one thing that the Beginning with Habitat program does that I'm not necessarily involved with is they work with towns and municipalities to help plan how they want to develop their town, and try to work to conserve large blocks of open space, to try to say, hey, if we cluster communities here, it leaves more open space here, so we can provide those large spatial requirements for wildlife habitat. All righty. So I think Ray is my mom. So that's a good question, Mom. And I think that a good discussion for Landowner 201, if this was Landowner 101.
That's awesome.
Well, any other questions? If not, shoot me an email, give me a phone call. I try to get back to everyone within 48 hours and do what I can. I do not go to New Hampshire because the state of Maine makes me stay here, but there are, I'm not sure, I don't believe New Hampshire has a private land biologist, but if you go on the New Hampshire Fish and Game website, they do have the contact information for their regional biologists, and they have similar programs in the forestry side of things to help with forest management plans. And New Hampshire has a small grant wildlife program that you can use to get cost assistance as you're doing wildlife habitat improvement on your property, if you qualify. So. And I saw that you dropped a note that you're having a U.S. Fish and Wildlife partner biologist. I've worked with Hannah a ton. She's super awesome. She's a really great resource to talk to and to hear from. So I'm really happy to see that she's going to be speaking with this group as well.
Nice. Thanks, Joe. Well, thanks so much for joining us this evening and presenting.
Yeah, well, thank you for having me.
I'm going to go ahead and stop the recording. Yay.
Perfect.